Have you ever watched someone solve a complex problem in minutes, map out an entire system, predict outcomes 3 steps ahead, explain something so clearly that everyone in the room goes quiet in admiration, and then completely fall apart trying to order food at a restaurant? Not because they're indecisive, not because they don't know what they want, but because something inside them locks up, freezes, goes silent. You've seen this person. Maybe you are this person, the one who can write a 10-page analysis but can't write a text back, the one who understands people deeply but can't ask for help, the one who can hold everyone else's chaos together but crumbles trying to do their own laundry during a hard week. And here's the part nobody talks about. It's more confusing when you're intelligent. Because you know better, you can see exactly what you should do, you can articulate the psychology behind your own paralysis with frightening clarity, and yet nothing, the knowing doesn't move you, the understanding doesn't save you, so you add it to the private list, the list of things you don't talk about, the ways you secretly feel. Stupid, the quiet suspicion that underneath all that intellect, something essential is missing. But here's what I want to tell you before we go any further: nothing is missing. Nothing was ever missing. What happened instead is something far more interesting and far more painful. And once you understand it, the person you've been performing for might finally be allowed to rest. Let's start at the beginning, not with IQ scores or academic performance, but with a child. A child who learned very early that their mind was their greatest asset. Maybe they were praised for being smart. Maybe being smart was the only thing that got them noticed. Maybe in a chaotic home, understanding the situation, reading the room, predicting the mood, analyzing the outcome was the only form of control they had. And so, the brain did what brains do. It specialized. It poured resources into cognition, into pattern recognition, verbal reasoning, abstract thinking. These pathways were trained, constantly rewarded, reinforced, used as survival tools, and at the same time something else was quietly pushed aside: the simple things. Not because they weren't capable of them, but because the simple things were never safe enough to practice. Psychologists call this cognitive emotional dissociation. It's when a person's intellectual development outpaces their emotional and practical development. The mind learns to function at an exceptionally high level, but the emotional nervous system underneath it remains fragile, underdeveloped, or frozen at an earlier age. In other words, part of you grew up very fast, and part of you never got the chance to grow up at all. A landmark study published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that children who are consistently praised for intelligence rather than effort or emotional expression develop a highly performance-oriented identity. Their sense of self becomes fused with being capable, being right, being impressive, and as a result, simple, ordinary, vulnerable human tasks become quietly terrifying, because ordinary tasks carry the risk of being ordinary, and for someone whose entire identity is built on being exceptional, ordinary feels like disappearing. But there's another layer, a deeper one. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development found that high cognitive ability without corresponding emotional regulation training actually increases overthinking, not decreases it. The more mental processing power available, the more scenarios your brain can generate, the more outcomes it can predict, the more ways it can imagine things going wrong. This is sometimes called analysis paralysis, and it's not a character flaw. It's intelligence without an off switch, a brilliant engine with no brakes. You weren't broken. You were built for a world that kept demanding your best thinking, and nobody taught you how to put the thinking down. And then there's the role of interoception, your brain's ability to read internal bodily signals. Things like hunger, fatigue, comfort, discomfort. Research from the Frontiers in Psychology journal shows that individuals with high intellectual development but low emotional attunement in childhood often exhibit reduced interoceptive awareness. In plain language, they lose touch with what their body is telling them. Which is why you can work for 14 hours without eating. Why you can be exhausted and not know it. Why you can be lonely and call it something else: restlessness, boredom, a need for new stimulation. You stopped speaking the language of your own needs, because somewhere along the way, needs became noise, and your mind learned to rise above the noise, not knowing it was rising above itself. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like, not in theory but in your life, on a Tuesday afternoon, in your relationships, in the quiet moments when nobody is watching. You might be extraordinary at your job and completely unable to make a doctor's appointment you've needed for 8 months. You might be able to give a friend a perfect articulate response to their crisis at midnight, and go completely blank trying to explain your own feelings to someone who loves you. You might understand attachment theory deeply and still find yourself either running from love or drowning in it, never quite landing in the calm middle. You might spend 3 hours crafting the perfect email, a single email, because every word carries the weight of how you'll be perceived. You might make huge life decisions with surprising speed and clarity and stand in a grocery store unable to choose between two nearly identical options because something about the smallness of it overwhelms you. You might be brilliant at long-term vision and terrible at the present moment, because the present moment is the one place your mind can't strategize its way out of. Think about this: intelligence in many ways is a time machine. It pulls you constantly into the future, projecting, planning, preparing, or it pulls you into the past, analyzing, reviewing, understanding, and the simple things. The simple things only exist right now, in the body, in the moment, in the plain, ordinary, unglamorous present, and you don't quite live there. Here's where it gets interesting. There's a pattern that emerges in highly intelligent people who struggle this way, and it lives in their relationships. Bessel van der Kolk, the psychiatrist and author of The Body Keeps the Score, described how people who intellectualize their pain don't stop feeling it. They translate it. They turn heartbreak into philosophy. They turn loneliness into productivity. They turn the ache of not being truly known into something they can analyze from a safe distance. But here's the truth: the distance isn't peace. It just looks like it from the outside. People who love you may have said things like, "You're so hard to reach. I never know what you're actually feeling. Sometimes it feels like you're explaining us instead of experiencing us," and you heard it, you understood it, you probably even wrote a thoughtful response in your head about why that happens, complete with developmental psychology references. And still you couldn't close the gap. This is the paradox at the heart of this experience. Understanding something completely and feeling it fully are two entirely different things. And for a long time you may have confused one for the other. We're halfway through something important here, so stay with me, because there's also the question of asking for help. Of all the simple things intelligent people struggle with, this might be the most quietly devastating. Not because they don't know they need help, they always know, but because asking for help requires a very specific kind of vulnerability, the kind that says, "I can't figure this out alone. I need you. I don't have the answer," for someone whose entire sense of safety was built on being the one who figures things out. That sentence is not simple. That sentence is an identity crisis. Psychologists call this the fawn and freeze response in high-achieving individuals, but it can also be understood through locus of control, the belief about where your power comes from. For many intelligent people who grew up in unpredictable environments, an internal locus of control became everything. I am safe because I am capable. I am okay because I handle things. And the moment you need someone else, the system shudders. You might push people away at the moment you need them most. Not because you don't care, because needing feels like losing the one thing you were allowed to be. And quietly, underneath all of this, underneath the analysis and the distance and the paralysis, there is a very tired person. Someone who has been performing intelligence for so long they've forgotten what it feels like to just be, to sit in a room and not have an insight, to feel something without immediately explaining it, to be mediocre at something and let that be okay. Drop a comment below if any of this is landing. I want to know what's resonating. Carl Jung wrote something that has stayed with me: the most dangerous psychological mistake is the projection of the shadow onto others. But what he meant more broadly was this: the parts of ourselves we cannot hold, we cannot heal. And for intelligent people, the shadow is almost always the simple self, the childlike self. The one who doesn't know, the one who needs, the one who gets confused in a grocery store and can't explain why. That part gets hidden, gets called weakness, gets folded into shame. But here's the invisible truth most people miss: struggling with simple things isn't a sign of low functioning. It's often a sign of a nervous system that was asked to carry too much too soon in the only way it knew how. By becoming very, very good at thinking, your intelligence was never the problem. It was the solution to something that should never have been your problem to solve. The child who became brilliant to survive a complicated home. The teenager who turned inward because the outer world felt too unpredictable. The adult who keeps the world at arm's length because closeness was never quite safe. These are not character flaws. These are the most loyal, resourceful adaptations a human being can make. The question isn't why are you like this? The question is, what were you protecting yourself from? And is that thing still there? Or are you still guarding against a danger that left long ago? Because sometimes the walls we build to survive become the walls we live inside. And what was once armor becomes a kind of loneliness. Healing for someone like you doesn't begin with thinking differently. It begins with something much harder and much quieter than that. It begins with letting yourself be bad at something and not immediately analyzing why. It begins with asking for something small: a favor, a hand, a moment, and letting someone give it to you. Without turning it into a study of your own attachment patterns. It begins in the body, in the breath you forget to take, in the meal you eat slowly without your phone, in the moment you let yourself feel tired without labeling it as laziness. Research by neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, outlined in his work on somatic marker theory, shows that our best decisions are never purely intellectual. They're always collaborative, a conversation between the mind and the body, between thought and feeling. When we cut off one side of that conversation, we don't become more intelligent. We become less whole. You don't need to become less intelligent. You need to let your intelligence come home, back into the body, back into the ordinary, back into the moments that don't require brilliance. Because here's what I want you to hold: the most intelligent thing a mind can do is learn to rest. The most advanced form of thinking is knowing when to stop, and the most profound insight available to you, more than any framework, more than any study, more than anything I could say in this video, you are allowed to be simple. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to need help on a Wednesday afternoon with something embarrassingly small. That's not a failure of your intelligence. That's the beginning of your humanity. Remember that child, the one who learned to be brilliant. Because brilliant was safe. You can finally tell them something nobody told them. Then you didn't have to earn your place here. You were always allowed to just be. The simple things aren't beneath you. They've been waiting for you. And maybe for the first time, you're finally ready to come home to them. What's one simple thing you've always struggled with? Drop it in the comments. You'd be surprised how many people share yours.